Hello, this is PD. Welcome back to the channel. I will be showing you all a guide from the DPS perspective of the Epic of Alexander T. This will help all players learn this fight, but tanks and healers, I do recommend referencing the text guide and the toolbox I have listed for more tank-specific and healer-specific mechanics. This guide uses the easiest strats you can use for prog. This is not for speed killing or any sort of advanced play to beat T. This is for easy clears. If you're learning from this guide, you are learning from the superb de facto text guide listed in the description, and you will be most compatible with other players using these normal strats. But enough about that, let's start the fight. So this is how the stage starts. You'll notice there's 3 puddles that spawn, and there's none in one cardinal of the stage here. So here north, there's no puddle that spawned. This is where the living liquid will be pulled, and each DPS will be assigned a location between the puddles. One ranged will go in one area between the puddles, and the other ranged will go between the other puddles. Because there's 4 dolls that will be spawning. The dolls each need to be hit first by DPS. First DPS that hits them will tether to that player. And it's the job of the DPS to pull them apart. You'll notice there's just an explosion here. The explosion, if you get hit by 2 of them, you're dead. So that's why you move out. Towards this line is enough right here to avoid getting hit by Venn diagram by 2 AoEs here. So once you do that, you tag your doll, and then you're free to move back in a little bit. You want to get your doll to under 25% HP. You want to feed it to living liquid one at a time. When you feed the doll to living liquid, and that is like run it into him, you'll see in a second here, it does AoE damage based on its remaining health. If it's 25% or over, it'll insta-wipe the raid. Now when it's at 24%, it does significantly less damage, and then it scales down a little lower from there. But basically, you don't need to worry about it if you hit it to 24%. Don't bother trying to get your doll to, 5%, because if you kill your doll, you also wipe the raid. So this is one of the most finicky mechanics, but at least it's in the beginning, so if you get a big crit direct hit and kill your doll, then it doesn't ruin a 20-minute long run. You'll see me bring the doll. I have a lot of time to bring the doll to lower percents. The melees typically feed the dolls first. You'll see there's one more AoE here with the luminous etheroplasm. Again, if you get Venn diagrammed here, you will die. So that's why these 2 dolls are separated and no one's getting hit by more than one. Do also notice there's 2 blue orbs moving through the arenas. One will come from the south puddle, one will come from like over here. If you touch them, it'll wipe the raid. So you're gonna watch as the range player over here, our machinist, goes to feed the doll. He's the 3rd to feed. He has to watch out for this blue ball here. And when he passes through, I'm just gonna come middle at my own pace here. Slide cast in there. The feed just happened. AoE damage was dealt. We're all a little low. Next thing that's going to happen is what's called Protean Wave. It will bait an AoE cone at each player in the raid. 4 players will stack in front, 2 in front, 6 in back. Doesn't really matter as long as you're at relative north-south to the boss. So the Protean Waves are baited. The next thing that's going to happen is the 4 farthest players will get an AoE puddle bait, and the 4 closest players will get basically another Protean Wave that's not telegraphed. So that'll happen right here. These are baited. Those Protean Waves were baited. Those are the 4 closest players. The 2 melees and the 2 tanks all baited those Protean Waves. They're going to move to max melee, whereas the DPS, the range DPS and healers that baited the puddles because they were the farthest players, are going to go to set positions around living liquid. The tanks and melees were also in set positions, so this is assigned beforehand. Work that out with your party. Assign those positions. I will show you the toolbox together after this, so you can go over this again. And we kind of wrap around the backside of the boss here, each taking one, like pizza slice here. You can see these lines will get hit by. We want to be closer than max melee. You can see our melees are still doing damage, but they want to be farther than us because these protean waves are baited by the closest players. So you'll see that go out. And then once that goes off, you've resolved like kind of the big opener in the fight. The next thing that's going to come up is like 8 big AoE damage moves. So if you're a caster here, that's just where you want to addle. This is a lot of damage coming out. You want to do it before he starts slamming the ground. So as you're moving back in here, once you get puddled, I typically go into triple cast and then make sure I get addle up right here. And then this is a lot of damage coming out. You don't need to use personal mitigation if you're a DPS, but the healers need to be ready. And during this whole time, you should be assigned to DPS either Living Liquid or the Hand. They need to stay within 5%, and this is going to be one of those checks to do that, coming up soon actually. And if they're not within 5% health of each other, then he'll cast a move that will wipe the raid if they're more than 5% HP apart. So I'm assigned to do damage to Living Liquid. And typically, like, yeah, 2 DPS will be on Living Liquid, 2 will be on the Hand, and you'll try and balance out the damage that way. But it's good to talk about the HP difference, you know, and you have your enemy list right here, and keep an eye on it. As a DPS, you can save your squad from wiping if you just keep an eye on this enemy list and watch the HP percentages of each and make sure they don't get too far apart. So we're going to hit a certain point. There's going to be the last Hand of Parting, I believe it's called, which is the health differential check. Once you cast that, you just go full-on burst mode on Living Liquid. So what happened there after those big AoEs, keep in mind we are also all stacked behind the boss during this, because there's these blue tethers going out that the tanks are taking AoE damage. You want to be away from them, so just staying behind the boss is good for that. Melee should still be able to go to the flank to get their positionals. More puddles are going to come up after the big AoE damage, and it's important that you reorient yourself to relative north again. North always being the place without the puddle. DPS and healers just get behind the boss again in the place where there are no puddles, and tanks will be in front of the boss where there's the puddles on that side. And then you bait the Protean wave. Get out before the cast bar completes. There's going to be 4 more puddle baits for the farthest players, and players also need to bait conal AoE from the puddles. This also happens during doll phase that I didn't mention, but the caster is not responsible for that. All it is really is that a ranged DPS and the healers will be baiting these puddles when possible. So you'll see our 2 healers go to the puddles here. So they'll bait their puddle and a conal AoE from the tornado. We have our ranged DPS over here closest to this puddle to bait their puddle. I guess closest to that tornado to bait their puddle AoE. And then the 4 come in. The melees go to max melee. And the 4 who just baited puddles need to now get a Protean wave because you can't get it by 2. We each bait our Protean wave, and now we need to burst down Living Liquid before we have another Hand of Parting. This DPS check can be a little tight, but you'll probably get pretty good at this phase where it's not worth it. You'll actually see our melee use Limit Break 1 there to make sure we got the kill, because it was actually pretty close. We had a low DPS that run. I'm not sure why. Here is the toolbox for Living Liquid. We have the dolls spawn on these little gold circles here, while the conal AoEs from the puddles shoot out at the closest players. So we have our ranged DPS and our 2 healers. Bait those out of the center. Our tank pull our Hand relative southeast and Living Liquid north. And we have each player tag a doll and bring it a little bit outside the center so no one gets Venn diagrammed. And we have these orbs here that wipe the raid that I mentioned that move towards the north. No one can touch those. The melees feed their dolls first after lowering the doll to below 25%. You see here we have Ninja feed first, Dragoon second. Doesn't matter. and then we have the machinist feed third. Finally, the caster. Then we have our Protean Wave baits. And we have the 4 melee players, 2 tanks, 2 melee. Bait the Protean Waves in addition to the telegraphed Protean Waves that are shot. The 4 farthest players get a puddle. Those are baited outside, and then those players move in to bait the next Protean Waves, while the melee players are max melee. So these 4 players want to be inside the target circle more or less, and the melees are max melee to avoid being one of the 4 closest players. The idea is that you can't get hit by 2 Protean Waves in a row. Puts a water resistance down debuff on you. Then a lot of AoE damage comes out. Addle's helpful, more mitigation, yada yada. A lot of AoE heals needed here. Machinist will come down here after the AoE damage is dealt, so he can deal with the puddle over here. The 6 players will line up behind the boss here, including the machinist. There's a phase that's kind of skipped here, and then tanks will be in front. They're holding the tethers, taking AoE damage, and mitigation is helpful here. A lot of healing required. This is where a hand of parting also happens to make sure that that they are within 5% health of each other. So you want to equalize damage here, because there's going to be one coming up. After the damage goes out, the damage on the tanks is done, the machinist is going to run through, or whichever physical range DPS you have, because they're going to bait this puddle over here. Players move out. Melees stay in so that they bait the Protean Waves. Healers bait their cone puddles away. Same with the machinist. Puddles are dropped, and then the 4 range players move in to bait the Protean Waves, as you can see here, and the melees bait the puddles from the tornadoes. One tank over here doing the same. And then you burst down Living Liquid. That is that phase.